Is it recording? Yeah, it has started recording. Right. Okay. So, right. So where is it? Share. There we go. I'm on my laptop, so the screen is very small. So if you see me doing this, it's because I can't see it. Okay. Yeah. So, and I'll be flicking backwards and forwards to actually see it on a bigger screen. So, okay. So this is, like I said, from my perspective as a mentor. Is that okay? Can you see the second slide now? Yeah. Basically, what I did was I had this kind of cycle. I was fortunate enough to, which I know that lots of mentors aren't, but I was fortunate enough to have a situation where kind of I was free at the same time that my mentee was free, which is, I think, a rare treat, really. And so therefore, what I tended to do was I tended to book an observation with him once a week. Now, of course, that was just because of my timetable worked like that. And I know some schools are a little bit more kind of mean with their giving their mentors time and things, but anyway, so I had a weekly thing, and so the way I used to work it was I used to do an observation towards the end of a week. It was because we got a 2-week timetable that changed alternate weeks, but essentially, let's say I went and saw my mentee, sorry, on a Friday. Okay, so I went and saw him on a Friday, and what I did is I tried to make sure that I filled in as much of Steplab as I possibly could, actually, while I was in the lesson. Now, I know that, Ambition or whatever, Steplab are telling us 20-minute observation, but it was never that short, because what I tried to do is I tried to make sure it was all done, because the way I started, Kate, was what I did was I went in with a pad of paper and I did kind of old school, and I started writing down all the things that that I was seeing and so on, and that just didn't work, because what happened is it kind of doubled my time, and I came out of the classroom and duplicated. So what I tried to do is I tried to take the laptop in and load up Steplab there and then, and actually work through it, which I'll show you kind of how I did it while I was in the lesson. So that kind of happened. That was the kind of start of my cycle, which was like on a Thursday or a Friday, depending which week I was on. And I did my best to try to see different classes, but it wasn't always the case. So it just happy accident was that the mentee that I had, he had some of his most difficult classes when I was able to observe. So it allowed us to kind of really get down to the nitty gritty, and it wasn't me seeing him do really well and then he was doing badly in private kind of thing. So that was good. So we'd go in and see it, and I would sit there and I'd do the observation. It would take me, I would say, on average 35 minutes, 40 minutes. We have hour and 15-minute lessons here, so I would go in maybe after the teacher had done the starter activity or something, depending what I was looking at. I mean, if I was looking at his starter activity, then I would obviously go at the beginning, but I would try to choose somewhere in the middle that would be reflective of what our target was, obviously. So then I go in, do the observation, all on Steplab, and what I would then do is that, because the way Steplab works is that your mentee doesn't get the feedback until you are in your mentor session. So what I used to do is a good tip was that I used to copy and paste everything I'd written about him and just basically paste it into a body of an email or a Word document or something, then send it off to him so he can have a look at it in advance of our mentor session. Because the way that Steplab works is that you fill in the form and it's kind of got the feedbacky bit at the bottom, so you can't finish the whole cycle until you've gone into the mentor session, which I understand why they've done that. But it means that if you leave it to the mentor session to give them their feedback, one, they kind of forget and it's not fresh anymore. But two, they've got to think about it and consider it there and then. And I think it's nice for them to go away and consider it and come back to the mentor session. So that was one thing I used to do, just copy and paste what I'd said about them and just email it to them and say, this is what I've taught, this is what I've put in your form at the moment. obviously if there's any inaccuracies or whatever, let me know. And then when in the mental session, we'll just quickly go through it. You can tell me what you think, and then we can move on to the next bit. So that was one thing that made my life a lot less painless. And then on the following Monday, just as it turned out, that was when our mental session was. We would spend a little bit of time talking about that lesson, and then moving on to the next target. So, if you look on the slide, we got the kind of screen you get when you load up, when you log in. So going into the observation, obviously click on the observation thing. Yeah. But one thing I would do during the observation, something that I think I was certainly worried about to start with, I don't know whether you are or not, but something I was worried about to start with was this tap and toggle thing. About the criteria. Now, I was told that they don't have to meet all of them for you to click, have they achieved this step? So on the screen in front of you, there's 6 little toggle switches. And sometimes I would give them like 4 or 5 of them and then click they'd achieved that step, because sometimes all of those things that Steplab had come up with in terms of the target wasn't necessarily relevant. Do you know what I mean? It was just kind of, those are the things that the Steplab came up with. And yeah, we all know, we look at that and we think, yeah, that's fair enough. But sometimes specifically some things weren't seen, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the student didn't meet their criteria. So kind of don't be afraid of leaving a couple of those, you know, as tagged as not done. And again, what I would do in the later observations, a lot further down the line, is I would, if I'd seen that in another lesson, but I hadn't directly seen it during my little observation window, because this is the other negative about doing 20 minutes, you don't get to see very much at all. So I would say to myself, you know, we've got to trust ourselves as professionals here and go, you know, have I seen Ewan was his name, have I seen Ewan doing this thing? Yes, I have. Tick, he's met that criterion. And so you know, some mentors have said to me that, oh, they find it really, really restrictive, and I get it, but I think you just got to be flexible and you know, just use it professionally. So that was during the observation, and then the thing where it says about the question, I would always edit the question. I mean, the question is always this generic thing about what, you know, something very generic, but I would always try and pick something specific so that it would move the conversation on. So that's the kind of question. Again, that question I would paste into my my email that I sent to them on the same day, so they could see what their feedback was and what was coming up. So there's no surprises in the mentor session. And then the next slide is kind of about the recording praise, which is the you know, you can say what went really well. And I think now not on this one, but on a later iteration of Steplab, it kind of, you can click on this shout out button or something, and it can tell all of the mentees that, you know, your mentee has done well, and it's kind of a public you know, confirmation that they're doing well. So on the recording praise thing, I made sure that I picked up anything that was really good, particularly things that had been we talked about before and he'd actually acted upon. So this decided on the next step. This is something that my kind of hack for this was that what I would do is I would, while I was in the lesson, while I was, you know, kind of making my notes and writing down all the things that I thought he did well and not did so well, I would go and I would click on, I would have a look at what the next steps that it was suggesting. And I would quite literally try to work backwards from the best one. Okay, so what I mean by that is, rather than clicking on one and going, okay, well, I don't want to pick any of these, I would go through and I pick one that I thought was relevant, and literally go through them and click on them to see what they were all about and think, right, well, that's the best one for him, and then use that one. So it was kind of like, you know, looking at the mark scheme first and then working out what question I was going to ask. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of way around. And like I said, the mentors I've spoken to have found this very restrictive, because, you know, each mentor and mentee work at different rates, and you get some mentees who, some ECTs are just going to get it, you know, and really do it quickly. Others are going to take longer to do it. So it kind of sounds a bit like a cheat, kind of going through and picking the right one, but it works really well, you know. And at the end of the day, we're trying to pick the most appropriate targets for the ECT that we can do from the list that we're given.
Yeah.
So and then the other thing that I talked to mentees about, and they you know, usually the response was, well, I feel a lot better after speaking to you, kind of thing. And that was, there's so many things that we do with our ECTs outside of this whole Steplab system, you know, little conversations we have on the corridor, emails, all that kind of stuff, that all goes into their training. And Steplab at the end of the day is just like a recording tool to show they've met certain competencies. And we all know that there's a whole load of things that are invisible that we don't get to kind of log on them. So just with the Steplab it's just, I think, you know, obviously you want to give it as most accurate representation of the ECT that you possibly can, but at the end of the day, if you don't tick every box and cover every single thing, is not to fret about it. Just do what you can do with Steplab. Yeah. Do you know what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, I've got it.
Yeah. So the next one was about sort of focusing on an appropriate type. Let's just have a look. Sorry, I've got to enlarge my screen so I can actually read the thing. Apologies. Just picking from that particular, you know, B7, for example, is on this slide about positive learning environment, and using obviously the most appropriate thing. So this is why I said doing it during the lesson, when you're doing it, sitting there while it's all happening live, it helps you to kind of zoom in on what things to do, rather than going away and thinking about it. And then when you get to the next step, which is the appropriate target for the next observation, you can, you know, while you're in the lesson, you can be thinking about the questions you're going to ask them, what kind of modelling you're going to do, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. That's most appropriate. So, you know, it's kind of going through what's in front of you and just making the best of it, basically, because sometimes it's not always going to be brilliant. And then, just makes sense. And then the next one was just what was that?
Selecting the next step.
Yeah. So now that you've selected the next steps, these little show task thing at the bottom. Sorry, I'm flicking backwards between screens here. I apologise. So select the task there at the bottom. Again, use your professional judgment to what you think is best suits the student. I don't know whether you picked up on this or not with Steplab and with Ambition, but one of their big things, I can't think of a word, one of their big things is modelling, you know, and you showing your mentee how it's done, kind of thing. And that can be, and you know, the little videos that they post are things like, you know, going up to the board and pretending there's a class there and taking them through whatever it is, Pythagoras' theorem, and pretending you're asking students questions. But what I did, I certainly did that to start with, and I certainly got my mentee up to do that as well. But then once he'd got, say, 2 or 3 months under his belt, it kind of seemed a bit pointless to keep doing that, because he was practicing at 3, 4, 5 times a day at least, you know. And so therefore I then changed the way I modelled to other things. So just deciding how best to model things in a mentor session, I think, should be up to the mentor. So case in point, so we went through you know, I'm going to ask the answer in 3, 2, 1, and now Johnny, you tell me what the answer is, all that kind of stuff. And then we moved on to, okay, so you know how to do the mechanics of asking questions. Now let's look at how you're asking the question, and you know what your worksheet says. And so I would, you know, I expanded my interpretation of modelling to I'm going to help you plan a lesson. I'm going to help you write a worksheet. I'm going to help you with how you explain Le Chatelier's principle. I'm going to help you with how you stand in a classroom. You stand here so that you can see what's going on. I'm going to help you to model how the students should be setting up their Bunsen burners, kind of thing. You know, it was anything and everything that we kind of do, we kind of forget about, that they don't show in the videos, because the videos are obviously have got to be very, very generic to all subjects. But in your particular subjects, I mean, another thing that I modelled was, you know, the assessments came round, and so I said, right, you know, grab five of your students' work, exam papers, and we'll sit down and we'll mark them together, and I will model how you interpret the mark scheme with students' answers. So do you see what I mean? So I think everybody's got to use their professional judgment with this and expand it out to whatever you think is appropriate to modelling for the ECT. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, no, it does, because it's all of those aspects, isn't it? It's not just I'm going to show you how to ask a question in the classroom. It's all the other peripheral things. Yeah. I mean, you know, I'm a science teacher too, and you know, some of those mark schemes are, when you first face them, like, I don't know how to do this. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So those sorts of things, like you said, I mean, I think the thing that that I certainly reflected on while I was sitting behind my laptop in the classroom was that certainly in the first few weeks and months, that a lot of the steps I was setting him to do were quite kind of discreet and kind of compartmentalized and very little, you know, and it was kind of like teaching somebody how to drive a car and saying, right, today we're going to use the steering wheel, you know, not any of the other pedals or anything. And it just seemed kind of fake. And so therefore I just thought it doesn't make any sense to completely focus on one thing. But if that is what Steplab is asking you to record, that is what you record. But there is a whole raft of other things that you can't help but have to talk about and address during your mentor session. So in terms of the mentor session, it kind of brings me on to the mentor session. The mentor session, the way we worked it was that I made sure that kind of the observation followed by Ewan doing his private study at home, you know, going on to Steplab and watching the videos, reading the case studies, and then us having the mentor session. I made sure that we did that kind of really rigidly every single, let's just let somebody else in. We did that every single week without fail. It was kind of sacrosanct how we did it. So therefore, I mean, our little model was, welcome, Helen, I'm just having a chat with Kate. So the model was, we'd observe at the end of the week, he would do his study. He decided he wanted to do his study on a Saturday morning after he'd gone for a run or something. He'd just log on to Steplab and do his weekly study. And then on the Monday, we had the mentor session. And so then we could kind of cap off the observation. We could talk about what the next steps were, press return, accept it. It'd show it was taken, it was ticked. One other thing to notice is whether the mentee is keeping up with their study, and you can easily see whether they've covered the modules. There's only a couple of times I had to remind him to do them. But that's something I think to keep on top of, is to make sure that they are keeping up with the program of study and that they are doing their modules in line with, you know, with the weeks. Something to be aware of, the people who are kind of higher up the chain are running reports regularly to see the engagement of not only the student, you know, the ECTs, student teachers, but also the mentors as well. So they're checking all that kind of in the background, just to make sure everybody's up to speed. But yeah, so we would have this. I would try to keep it as rigid as I possibly could. Observation followed by him doing his study, followed by a mentor session, and then just rinse and repeat, and doing that every week. And that getting them into a routine just really helped him keep on top of things. And yeah, just the other thing is that if you're on Steplab, there's a section called Learn, and what it does is it puts up what the mentee is learning, and the idea is that you look at those videos and you read the case studies as well. And when I first started it, I would sit down and I would do it, go through everything. And as I kind of got up to speed with Steplab and I got up to speed with kind of the feel of the whole course and what was going on, I would read things faster. I would put the videos on faster speed, so it took me less time to watch them, so that I knew what he had watched, and so I could have a discussion with him. And I would always ask him a question about what he'd read, just to make sure he'd done it and that he hadn't just skipped it and clicked done. But when you do that, there are some sections that you are required to type in text for.
Yeah.
And at the first time I did it, I thought, what have I got to type in here? And really, that's what the mentee is supposed to be doing. That's what your ECT is supposed to be doing.
Yeah.
So I ended up just typing done in all, DONE, just done in every box, just to show that I'd looked at it. Because obviously it's not that process is for him to go through and him to learn from. Yeah. So don't worry about, you know, adding reams of text and all your thoughts and intricacies on those modules, but I think it's important that you do give them a few minutes to know what your ECT is looking at this week.
Okay.
And then the next slide was yeah, so the evidence to identify the next step. So this is the bit where like I said before, you know, I looked at the mark scheme before setting the question. So I would look at what the next steps were, and I'd look at what the range of things were, and then I would kind of look back at the lesson that was being taught as I was doing it live, and thought to myself, which of these steps is the most appropriate from what I can see him doing or what he's done in the last few weeks. Then I would choose one, and then I would tailor the evidence to the next step. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So kind of working backwards, but using kind of the endpoint to make my evidence during the lesson completely agree with the next step. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
So if it was a question in step, then I would make sure I put something in the evidence from the lesson for the next steps about questioning, so it led on nicely. And do you know what I mean? So so everything tied together basically, and that really worked for me and helped me to focus on one thing, because you know what it's like when you observe somebody, you've got a whole list of things that they could be working on, but choosing one is difficult enough.
Yeah, good.
Yeah, so and then yeah, so then that allowed Steplab to say that the observation was complete once I'd done that. And then of course, then once the observation is complete, it then releases the observation notes to the mentee at that point. And of course, you're in the mentor session when you do that. You would be in your mentor session when you've done that. So like I said, try to do as much as you possibly can in the lesson, and then copy and paste all of your notes off to your student. And then when you get to the mentor session, you've just got to go through that and click done. Or, you know, adjust some factual inaccuracies that you may not have done in the lesson, and then jobs are good, and then you can move on to the next step.
Okay.
Yeah. So and that process kind of worked for me. So in terms of, I'll just skip on a couple of slides. This one here, this workflow that worked for me was your meeting with your ECT approximately for an hour, set the date for the observation, which was usually at the end of a week. Observe between 30 and 40 minutes, doing all the Steplab stuff on my laptop while I was observing, going off to the steps, looking for a step that was relevant for him, going back to the gather evidence and making that tie up with the next step, and then emailing the feedback to my ECT, and then going back to the ECT and feeding back face to face, and then moving on to the next step with the modelling. And the modelling, of course, was whatever I saw fit to model, which I thought he needed.
That's great.
Does that kind of make sense? I mean, I know it's very, very rushed and very quick, but
no, thank you. It's really helpful.
I think the way I felt when I first started doing it, if I may say so, and that is, I kind of felt that it was leading me rather than the other way around. You know, I was clicking on the steps and it was kind of going, right, now you have to go this way. And it was, it was leading me. But then I soon got to learn really that, you know, obviously I was responsible for bringing this teacher on. And so therefore I was going to do anything that I thought would lead him on. But that kind of Steplab sat alongside that as a way of recording evidence of his competence. But there was a whole load of other stuff that I did alongside that to kind of help him out. So, you know, at the end of the year, because he went, he got another job and he went and moved up north and got a job up there. So I couldn't do his ECT2 with him.
Oh.
But which is a shame. But I kind of felt safe in the knowledge that I'd done lots of other things with him in mental sessions, and you know his practice had moved on considerably, particularly, you know, as you know, with the science teacher, the things like tightening up his language of how he used key terms in the classroom. And you know, I part of a good one was he's a biologist and I'm a physicist, so I said to him, I want you to explain something A-level biology to me, and then I'm going to pick apart how you've explained it. So that was another way that, you know, obviously we have to make sure our explanations are clear and concise and using the correct language. And so that was another good mental session that we had, picking apart what he'd actually said, and he'd made assumptions about what I knew, and so therefore, you know, that was relevant to a class. So just I don't think that the bottom line really is just Steplab's a tool for recording stuff, but you just trust yourself to do what you think the mentee needs at that particular time, and try to fill in Steplab as best you can.
Yeah. Oh, thank you ever so much for taking me through that.
No problem. Have you got any questions?
Well, I've taken some screenshots as you've been talking.
Okay.
So I'm going to read through what you've got. And then go through the process. So yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. That's really helpful. Thank you, Chris.
No problem. Is there anything difficult you found so far?
Not so far. I mean, I've just been tinkering with it, if I'm really honest.
Yeah, sure.
Trying to work out where things go, what would I do on this particular form, that kind of thing. So just tinkering with it at this stage. But I want to kind of get going. But now I've got the screenshots are helpful because I know what I'm going to see next.
Yeah, so the tinkering thing is massively underrated. I think like I said, I've had some mentors say to me, "Oh, I don't want to press this," or "I'm worried about it doing this and that." But the thing is that's how I learn. I just basically went through it and navigated my way through it, and I made mistakes. You know, near the beginning, I had I clicked on something, or I didn't save something, or it didn't do something that it should have done, and it registered as I hadn't completed it when I knew I had. So there's always going to be little teething troubles and frustrations like that. But just, you know, just tinker with it. And like I said, there's nothing wrong in going ahead and seeing what the next step is and then trying to work back to it. It's because it's not as flexible as perhaps, you know, it should be. It's, you know, it's reasonably inflexible, to be honest, but it's just, you know, it's just one of those things. It's just one of those things we fill in to evidence what's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, thank you ever so much.
No problem. Okay, well, if there's nothing else, if you want to, you're very welcome to email me. I'm not sure whether, or Danny or whatever, and if there's anything that, you know, if you're getting a pickle or whatever, 10 minutes on here might help or whatever. But I should imagine you'll be fine. It's just, you know, just don't. I've seen some people get very kind of stressed about it, and I just think, and it's probably because they've not been given enough time, you know, because poking around takes time. It does. It's one of those things. So,
thank
all
you.
right.
Take care. Have a nice half term.
No, thank you. You too. Take care. Hello, Helen. Have you not got a mic, Helen? Oh, right. Okay. Fair enough. Is there any way I can help? Oh, okay. So is there any way I can help? Because this Teams meeting is really for mentors, to help mentors out with Steplab. If there's anything I can help you with, then I might be able to give you some answers. Right. Okay. So I'm reading that it means that you don't need my help. So I'm hoping you can hear me. So if you don't need my help, that's fine. And I will come off this call. I think all I would say is if you are an ECT, yeah, no worries. If you are an ECT, just obviously make sure you're keeping up with the modules on Steplab and that you're doing the right number per week, that kind of thing. Because like I said to Kate a minute ago, people are looking at it in the background. So whether you're an ECT or you're a mentor, that your progress through the course is being checked. So just make sure you keep up with that. Which that's probably something really obvious, but all right, okay, no worries. Take care. Have a good half term and a good evening. No problem.